Welcome to the Surviving Siblings podcast. I'm your host, Maya Roffler. As a surviving sibling myself, I knew that I wanted to share my story, my brother's story. I lost my brother to a homicide in November 2016, and after going through this experience, I knew that I wanted to share my story and his story. And now it's your turn to share your stories. Today I have Jen Hoy with me, who is, of course, a surviving sibling. Jen, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. So Jen is going to be sharing the story of losing her brother Teddy with us today. Jen, tell us a little bit about growing up with Teddy, your family dynamics. Kind of take us back to what life was like growing up in your family.
Okay. So, to tell the story of life growing up in my family, I need to just let you know that we grew up in the 70s and 80s, where it was a free range childhood. And we grew up outside of Boston, part of an enormous Sicilian family. And a thing about the Sicilian immigrant culture is family is everything. And so I didn't just grow up with my brother. My mom's sister had a son and a daughter, similar in age to me and Teddy. My cousin Nicole is actually 25 days older than I am. And the four of us were raised like siblings, and we were always together. And so we were all super close. We fought like cats and dogs all the time, like all the time. And it was a lot of family all the time. Anything I did, my brother came with me. Sometimes that was a good thing, and sometimes it wasn't.
So, what was the age difference between you and Teddy, just so people can understand that dynamic?
So we were about 18 months apart, but we were meant to be closer to 2 years apart. Teddy was born 4 months early in 1975 when micro-preemies were not very common and they didn't live very long. My brother is a twin. His twin Joseph survived maybe a few hours after birth, and Teddy remained at Children's Hospital in Boston for, I think, over a year.
Wow. So you're older than Teddy?
I am older, and I
Okay,
took that
yes.
job very seriously.
Yes. I can connect with that too. But what I love about you sharing about the dynamic is there's a lot of folks that listen to the show that have lost a cousin that has felt like a sibling as well. And I do think it matters how you're brought up. And when you're brought up with that type of cultural background like you were brought up in, that's very common to feel like you have multiple siblings because of the way that you grow up. But what is unique about you and Teddy is you grew up, like you went to bed in the same household, you rose, but then you were still in this dynamic. So it's interesting. And I find that a lot of like step siblings or half siblings sometimes can relate to that cousin relationship that were brought up in that dynamic too. And it's important to highlight those relationships. And I think that's really cool. And I'm glad that you brought that up, that you had this foursome dynamic that was going on.
Yeah. Honestly, for my cousin Michael, who was Teddy's counterpart, the loss was profound and
Right.
in a way that I don't think that a lot of people understood or appreciated. And he's felt like he can talk to me. We talk to each other about all of these things that we feel like we can't talk about in the open with our Sicilian family. But I get it, he gets it, and it's nice to have that support.
Yeah. And I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but since we're talking about this, I want to highlight that. Do you feel like with your cousin, this is your cousin, Maya, do you feel like it brought you, sounds like you guys grew up close anyway, but do you feel like it's been an additional bonding for the two of you that you've been able to connect and talk through this? Because I know that's so healing for a lot of us that feel like we have no one to connect with about our loss.
Yeah, no, absolutely. One of the things that Teddy and I did frequently is we texted every day or talked every day when cell phones did not exist.
Mm-hmm.
And Teddy loved to send just random memes or pictures. And Michael started doing that to me, just some of the most bizarre things that you would ever imagine. And it made me smile. It made me happy because I felt like I had that connection. But similarly, like a lot of Michael's memories, all of his history and my history is also Teddy's. And so it's hard for him to look at a lot of his own family pictures because Teddy is in all of them. And so he has asked, I can't look at the pictures, but when I'm ready, will you show them to me? And it's nice to be able to say that and not cause a thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And so you mentioned this so early on, so I had to ask. And I know all of us are always looking for other family members that we can connect with and speak openly about. Tell us a little bit about Teddy. What was Teddy like growing up with? Like, what was his personality like? I'm curious to know him. And I know you took being an older sis really like that was a responsibility. And I connect with that too. I'm the oldest of four. So I totally get that. But tell us a little bit about what he was like growing up.
I'll try to keep my language clean. Teddy was a massive pain in the butt. Like, he was impulsive and he was a clown and he was always punished because he just did things just to see what would happen. I remember one time we heard our next door neighbors screaming, like, Teddy, no. And we went outside, and there's 5-year-old, 6-year-old Teddy with the garden hose spraying them as they were leaving for a family wedding because he just wanted to see what would happen. And he was just like that. And he was a clown, always a clown. But he also, because he was born so early, he was a lot smaller than kids his age. And kids picked on him a lot. And that's where kind of being his sister was, I took that job seriously and I got into a lot of fistfights. And that's coming from a traditional Sicilian family. Girls are meant to be quiet and dainty, and boys are meant to be strong. So we kept all of this a secret from our family because I would be punished for fighting and he would be told, well, you need to toughen up. But sometimes the kids that just picked on him were a lot older, sometimes teenagers when we were 10 and under. But growing up with him, when I say we fought, there were times there were house rules that we were not allowed in one another's bedrooms because he would just come in and rearrange things purposely because he knew it would drive me crazy. But he was also my best friend. And that's hard sometimes to think about because I remember like wishing I had a sister. I didn't want this brother. And when my youngest was born, he had a lot of Teddy's qualities as like a toddler, impulsive and a clown and always had something to say. And I remember my mom one day saying, oh, you were such a good kid. I don't know how you ended up with a Teddy. And the two, Teddy and Joseph, or my Joey, were like this. And at the time, I remember being like, "How did this happen?" And now, when I see those traits come out in my kids, I encourage it. Like I'm not upset.
And I'm sure it's, there's my Teddy, right? It like reminds you and it's heartwarming. Yeah.
Although,
Yeah.
like even into adulthood, one of the first things he did with my son Joey, at 3 years old, taught him every word to the song "Baby Got Back."
Oh my God, stop.
And he would just walk around singing it. Like even when he got to kindergarten and I ended up getting a call from the teacher, or
Mhm.
like Joey couldn't spell his own name, but Teddy taught him how to spell butt. And he wrote butt on everything in place of his name. And it was like, Teddy, why are you doing this? But now I look back and I think like, Teddy, thank you. Like
Mhm.
those are fun memories.
Yeah, like now it's heartwarming now that you've obviously gone through the loss and it's so difficult as we all know. But yeah, it's oh my gosh, it's funny because Teddy reminds me a lot of my brother. My brother was such a prankster too, and it was like everything was funny, everything was a joke. And so you appreciate it more later. I totally get that. We hope you're enjoying this incredible episode of the Surviving Siblings podcast. I'm your host, Maya Roffler. We'll be back in just a minute after hearing from our incredible sponsor. If you've lost a sibling, trust me, I know exactly how you feel. I'm Maya. I'm the host of the Surviving Siblings podcast, but I'm also the founder of Surviving Siblings Support.
I know that going through this experience is extremely difficult, whether you've lost a brother like me, a sister, or perhaps more than one sibling. Trust me, we know exactly how you feel. So that's why I started our Patreon account. You can click below to find out more about our Patreon. If you join our Patreon group, it'll give you just a little bit of extra support that you need along your journey as a bereaved sibling, or as we like to call it, a surviving sibling. We offer monthly support groups. We offer a free copy of our grief guide that is actually found on Amazon. It's called the Grief Guide for Surviving Siblings. We also offer direct messaging to our community and to me for extra support. And we have incredible events. We have workshops throughout the year that you'll get access to, and you'll also have access to our summit that happens annually. And so much more as you'll connect with a community of surviving siblings that understand the journey of losing a sibling. You can click below to join us today and also check out some additional VIP features that we offer. I hope to see you in the group, and until then, keep on surviving, my surviving siblings.
So tell us a little bit. So Teddy was obviously like this throughout your whole life together. So you guys went to high school together and like went to school together, right? This was like you were so close in age.
We did. And I remember one of my like proudest moments in grammar school was I overheard somebody say to a boy who was going to do knock my brother over, "Oh no, you don't want to mess with him. His sister will kick your butt." And I remember feeling really proud of myself in that moment. So he had stayed back in kindergarten. He repeated kindergarten because he just wasn't like socially ready. So we were 3 years apart in school. So when I was a senior in high school, he was a freshman. And I do think sometimes that was difficult for him because, as a rule follower and a perfectionist, I was so focused on getting good grades, and school wasn't something that came easily to him. And I think sometimes people were like, "Well, why couldn't you be more like your sister?" And I feel badly about that because we were two totally different people.
Right. Yeah, I connect with that too, Jen, because I think when you're in a family dynamic, which of course everybody listening to this show has at least one sibling, so they understand that every person is very unique, right? And when you're siblings, oftentimes you're compared and it's doesn't always feel good. It doesn't always feel good. And it can be challenging. And I've often thought about that with my own brother too. And there's me and then there's another sister that were older than him. And then there's the baby in the family. And I always felt like he was compared to all of us in different ways. He was no longer the baby, but so there's that identity questioning and it is difficult. It is
It
difficult.
is.
And to follow the oldest is not always easy either. And we're old enough now where we can look back and identify with that and understand that.
Absolutely. But also for me, it was difficult, like, because Teddy got away with so much.
Right.
And I would say, why? And they would say, because he's special, meaning like, we're lucky we even have him here. But to me, I heard Teddy is special. And like one of my favorite pictures of us is I share it all the time on social media. It's a picture of us at the beach in the summertime. And I'm super tan and my hair is a mess and I have a scowl on my face. And there's little Teddy. He's so pale and he's got this beautiful, like blonde, angelic, curly hair and the little sweet smile. And I think this is the epitome of us. Like I look at this picture and there's sweet and special Teddy, and then there's like the big brute big sister. So
And it's just like like you feel like that picture is just like all encompassing of how like the relationship felt. And yeah,
and I've brought it up in therapy and I've showed my therapist and I said like this is like when I think of like the proof that Teddy was the good one and
right.
I'm not. My therapist was no, what I see is a sister, a really cute picture of two kids, and the sister has her arm lovingly around her brother, which every photo that I have pretty much of us, I have my arm around him. And that kind of helped me think of it a little bit differently, which was nice. So I can look at that picture now and not see like, here's the proof that Teddy was the good one and you're the bad one, but here's proof that you loved each other.
That is so powerful. It's why I'm a huge fan of therapy. Like, I talk about it all the time. I wouldn't be here doing this show or having this community, Jen, without therapy. It takes the right therapist, don't get me
It
wrong,
does.
but
It
I
took me
mean,
a very long time to find the one that was right for me.
right. I think that's a huge point for people to know, because I often hear people say, like, I went once and it wasn't for me. And often I just feel that it's because it wasn't the right person for you. It wasn't the right therapist, because I think stylistically, I think also somebody who understands what you're going through, because how powerful was that session for you where you went in and you showed that picture and your therapist was able to reframe how you felt about that?
And I've said to her, I can never look at that picture in that old way again, because anytime I look at it, I think of what she said. And it was true. I loved him so much. And I know he loved me back. And so it was really helpful, especially on my grief and healing journey,
Yeah.
because that survivor's guilt, I'm always looking for the proof
Hmm.
that the universe got it wrong. And I was trying to show her, see that this picture tells you why. And she said, no, this picture says you both should be here and that you love one another very much.
So powerful. And you're going to carry that with you for the rest of your life. Like, what a gift. So, I want to come back to your therapy work in a little bit, but I want to ask you a few more questions.
Sure.
So, I want to go back to Teddy. So, Teddy was born a preemie and had a twin, but you didn't know about this.
No.
So, how old were you when you found out that Teddy was a twin? I think this is fascinating in your story. So, can you share a little bit about that with us, Jen?
I was probably about 7 or 8 years old, and I figured it out on my own and asked my parents. It wasn't something that was talked about. And then of course, as a young kid, I had all the questions like, well, where is he? And there was a grave at local cemetery. I had never been there. I in my entire life I never saw it.
Wow.
Um we didn't discuss it. We didn't discuss, like, once or twice my mother would say, "Oh my god, can you imagine if there were two of them?" Because like Teddy would do things that were like so outrageous that you were like, if there were two of them, we would all be losing our minds. But never talked about him.
What an interesting thing for your mom to say, though. Like, what if there were two of them? Right? It's like, I'm sure you look back and you're like, wait a second. So, you approached your parents and then they told you. You were
Yeah,
like,
yeah. And I was 7 or 8, so I didn't even have the right. I was like, "Hey, who's this?" You know,
right, right. We're just like, at that age, we're just kids and we're just like, what's going on? Like, just
yeah,
tell
like,
me. Like, there's
"What's
no
this?"
filter.
And
Yeah.
they were like, "Well, Teddy had a twin. They were born too early, and he didn't survive." And that was all we talked about. And I imagine, as parents, like, I I can't even imagine the depth of the grief that they felt
Of course.
for the loss of Joseph, but then watching Teddy grow up, knowing that half of him was missing.
Right. Because we know from being siblings and also just talking so much in this community, being a twinless twin, like, that's the phrase that I've learned in doing this work in this community, it's a big deal and they feel that. Do you think so? This is a question to follow up on that. Do you think Teddy felt that in his life? And did he know? Or when did he find out that he was a twin? Like,
Yes.
what was that process? You figured it out. Of course,
Yeah.
Detective Big Sister figured it out. But
Yeah.
what about Teddy?
Obviously, we didn't talk about anything in my house. That's just the culture.
Like,
But
that it was the culture and the time,
in the
like the
time,
era, right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
So, one of the things when my parents cleaned out my brother's house, and they were just going to throw everything away. And I said, no, look, I would love to have his photo albums. Like, photo albums are so meaningful to me. And I also have all of our family albums. I remember I was looking for a specific photo of us one Easter where there was an Easter egg hunt, and I ran ahead and found all of the eggs. And it's me smiling and laughing. And then there's poor Teddy crying because he didn't find any eggs. And I didn't share any eggs, but I could never find the photo. And I said, Mom, there's got to be a missing album somewhere. And they were getting ready to paint, and they cleaned out a closet and they found it and they sent it down to my house this past Christmas. And I was going through it, and it included Teddy's first communion photos. And they had, like, one of the things that was in the album was a thing they had done in like the Sunday school of different things and things I would like to ask God. And one of them was in his little 7 or 8 year old handwriting, if my brother Joseph is safe in heaven. And
Oh my
I sat and just looked at it for hours. Like I can't imagine like the enormity of what that little Teddy was feeling. And he wrote that, and like I wondered, did he get the answer? Did anyone address it? Like I have no idea.
wow. That's in like, and it's interesting that you felt so compelled to have that picture, and in that combination of pictures, it's like it was almost like a gift that you were receiving
It
in
was a
that.
gift. And one of the things that anyone who's lost somebody can relate to is that finite number of photos. That's all you have for the rest of your
Mhm.
life. And to get this album that I knew existed and I couldn't find it, and I remembered just one photo, to see an entire album of new photos that I had never seen before or couldn't remember, that was an enormous gift that I don't even think my parents realized the enormity of the gift.
That's oh, wow. Jen, oh my gosh. So like what a beautiful part of your story and Teddy's story. So as you guys moved through life, as life happens in high school, and you guys didn't talk about Joseph then. It wasn't really a
No,
right. So
never,
what a
never.
huge moment. Wow. So take us forward to 2017. We're going to jump a little ahead. Tell us, what was Teddy like and what was he going through? Because those of you who have already read our title and our show notes know that we lost Teddy by suicide. So,
Mhm.
what was going on with Teddy? What was life like for him and for you? And take us there.
So we had lost our grandma Jenny just before New Year's in 2016. And growing up in this big family, she was like she was our person. And we spent most of our time at her house. And
So
after
she
my
was like your
grandpa,
matriarch of the family.
oh, yes, yeah,
Yeah.
yes. And after her husband, my Papa Joe, passed away, Teddy, who wasn't married, didn't have any kids, he worked a later shift at work. He would often stop by my grandparents' house, make sure my grandma was all set, did, whatever she needed to be done. And I know she really looked forward to his visits. So he spent a significant amount of time with her before her decline. And that's important because when you think back to what could have happened, I really think that losing her was a catalyst. But then also in at the end of March of 2017, his partner at work, Debbie, lost a 20-year battle with cancer. And they never had a romantic relationship. I think in part because of her illness, but I truly in my heart have always believed that they were soulmates.
Wow.
And like a little over a month later, he was gone. But he seemed okay. We talked or texted every day. To be honest, I was the one who was struggling in the weeks leading up to his death. And he was always trying to make sure that I was doing okay. And I never, like, I will always regret not saying, like, hey, how are you doing after Debbie? Like, can I support you? Like, I never asked that. So I got, when I learned that he had died by suicide, I was like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Like, he's fine.
Right.
He wasn't fine.
What's interesting about this, like moving forward, loss can be so devastating, as we all know on this show and community. And so losing the matriarch of your family and him spending so much time, and obviously all of you did, that's devastating. And then he had this soulmate partnership at work. And I feel like as siblings, like we know when our sibling like deeply loves someone, even if they don't end up in a marriage or have kids, or like we know, we're like, we see that spark in their eye, we see the commitment that's there. So I think it's interesting how you shared that. And those are two devastating losses. And if you're having a friendship, deep friendship with someone and you work with them, you're spending the majority of your time with that person.
Yeah.
Very intense. And so, and that's a deep anticipatory loss that he went through because she was battling. It's a lot. And I think what a testament to him that he was checking on you through all of this and making sure you were okay.
I know. And it's one of those things that I use as that evidence of why he was the better of the two of us. Because I was so wrapped up in my own stuff that I wasn't even paying attention.
But let me ask you this, Jen. So, leading up to his death, he was asking you how you were doing and being there for you. And I think that's amazing. But had Teddy ever struggled with mental health or anything in his past? Was this something that you guys had talked about, or he had openly shared, or he was struggling with? And fortunately, this happens in silence, right? Tell us a little bit about that in Teddy's background.
Well, so I've shared that he was bullied. And
Right.
the level of bullying that happened was just outrageous. But in the early 80s, there was no consequence for bullying, which
Mm-hmm.
is why I was always fighting. And when I say the level of bullying, the worst, there were two moments that broke him as a kid. And one, I was riding my bike and I heard him calling for me, and I found him tied to a stop sign with firecrackers at his feet. And there were a group of like young teen boys. So I was maybe 10, so they were probably 15, and they were laughing. And I went into a white hot rage and I fought every single one of them. And we went home and never spoke of it. And the other was, it wasn't just kids, it was adults too. My brother, one of the issues from his prematurity, his ears stuck out like pretty bad. Kids and adults would both call him Dumbo, as in the elephant.
Oh my
And
God,
my
Jen.
parents had put him in karate lessons to try to toughen him up, which wasn't about to happen. But
That's
there
so
was a,
the 80s though, right?
yeah,
80s, like
oh, absolutely. Yeah, there was no reenactment of the Karate Kid, that's for sure. But I remember being at the studio during his lesson, and some dad said, "Hey, Dumbo, when's the next flight to Florida?" And so I turned around and I just punched the man in the stomach. And
you're the best. I think you're the best. I
well,
totally get you because I'm the oldest too, and I'm like, I can say anything I want about my siblings, but that's crazy. That's a parent.
but when the dojo master or whatever asked and my parents asked, I refused to say because I didn't want Teddy to get in trouble for not standing up for himself. So I just took the punishment and we never talked about it. So this bullying, I think, really impacted his self esteem. And then when we got to high school, I remember it was my freshman year in college, and I got a call that Teddy had been bullied by a group of the football players. And he was afraid and he brought a knife to school for protection. And the kids had surrounded him, and he had the knife out by his side and accidentally stabbed one of the boys in the
Oh
hand
my goodness.
because the boy went to punch him and he put his hand up to block. But what happened afterwards was that Teddy was arrested at the school in front of his classmates, put in a cell at like 13 years old. They took his shoelaces away. and the other boys never got into trouble.
Can definitely affect you for life.
And again, never discussed it in our family. It was like, okay, let's move on. And then my daughter Abby was a baby, so probably about 2003. My dad was traveling for work. My mom was away with her friends. And I got a call from the hospital in Boston saying that they had my brother Teddy there and that he had asked specifically for me. And I wasn't understanding what was going on, but he had attempted to take his own life at, on the Tobin Bridge in Boston because,
And
but
how
he,
sorry, Jen, how old was he at this point?
oh God, 2003, he was born in 1975. I don't do math. Is that in his
But
30s?
this was in
He was,
2003, right? Okay,
yeah,
so yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
But he, in his mind, he worked at the state house as a ranger, and he knew, I think we had talked about it, and he knew in his mind that if he went to the Tobin Bridge, the state police officers that he knew from the state house would be close by and they might be able to help him. And they did. So he did inpatient program for a couple of weeks, transitioned to outpatient. He joined AA, stopped drinking, went back to normal Teddy. He is always physically active. He's still his same funny self. And that's how life went on for about 15 years.
That's a
And
lot of trauma though, Jen.
it really is. It really is. And I think that the time that we lived in, therapy was not recommended, popular, or even like suggested.
Don't you feel like even at that time it was, "Oh, if you're in therapy, oh,
Yeah.
like there's something wrong with you?"
Well,
Like
it was a big secret in my
mm,
family that Teddy was inpatient in the hospital. And that bothered me because I felt like I'm not understanding. Like he's sick, he needs help. And it's tough because when he did die, and he died by suicide, initially my parents weren't going to have a service at all of any kind. They wanted to keep everything a secret.
right.
And one of my aunts said, "What? How can we say goodbye?" Like, and I'm glad that she asked that question to give us that opportunity. We had a graveside service, and only immediate family went to the funeral home, but over 400 people showed up at the graveside service, and it effectively shut down the city. His graveside service shut down the city for the day. He touched that many lives in his 41 years.
I connect with a lot of this part of the story, Jen, because my family was similar because there was it was not suicide, but there was shame because my brother had addiction and drugs and all of that in his life. And so the homicide, they wanted to keep a lot of things secret. I don't care. That's why I talk about it publicly. I don't care. He deserves to be honored just like you're honoring your
Mhm.
sweet brother Teddy. And the amount of messages that I received and the folks that asked me, very similar to the question you got, how can I honor? It fills my heart to this day to get that question. How can I honor? I can't come. I can't. They I think one day I'll probably do something bigger so people can come. But my parents didn't want anybody to come, and it was heartbreaking for me because I knew how many lives my brother had touched as well. And so I'm glad for you that at least there was some place for them to go, but that's so difficult. That is so difficult, but there's so much I'm feeling so positive that we're moving in a better direction about mental health, about we're talking a lot about bullying on this episode. We're bringing awareness to it and suicide because there's why are we shameful of this? This is real. This has been going on for thousands of years. Like, this is crazy that we're still feeling this way. I want to go back before we go forward.
Okay.
So, Jen, when you got the call, who called you? So my very first episode on this show, as most of you, is called The Call because that's the moment that changes our life. We either give the call, we get many calls. It depends on your circumstance. Who called you? How did you find out? And what exactly happened with Teddy's suicide? If you can share that with us, that would be wonderful.
So I was out to dinner with my daughter and some of her classmates from a community play she was doing. And I noticed on Facebook that one of our childhood friends was liking all of these old photos of Teddy. And I thought, oh, that's weird, but whatever. She's strange. So, and then I got home and my husband was just standing there and I said, what's wrong? And we hadn't been speaking for weeks because I brought chickens home, like live chicks,
Yeah.
after he said not to. And
Yeah.
so this was the first time we had spoken in weeks. And he said, Teddy's gone. And I go, what do you mean? What do you mean he's gone? Like, where did he go? And he said, he died. And I don't remember much after that. We called, Jimmy was out, my older son, Jimmy was out with his friends. He was a senior in high school. We said, you need to come home now. And we told the two older kids who were 15 and 17 at the time. And Joey was only 6. He was in bed. So we waited until the next day. My dad had called the house to tell us. So, and I called my parents. Obviously, they were not fit to talk. I said, I want to come up. And they said, no, don't come up tonight. Please just come up tomorrow morning. And that was the longest night of my life.
Of course. All of us can relate to that. It's, whew.
And then
Any
holding my
sleep that
breath
night.
for the hour ride from my house to my parents. Like,
So when did you find out what happened? Because you had mentioned in 2003 that Teddy had the bridge, but when did you get to your parents' house? And like when you just knew he was gone, but when did this all start to unfold for you?
so my mom was able to tell me enough. So she and her friends were having a Cinco de Mayo party at my parents' house. And my dad, as he normally did on a Friday night, had plans to go out to dinner with Teddy. They went every Friday. And Teddy was always punctual, if not early. So when the time came and went that Teddy didn't arrive to pick up, my dad called him, tried to reach him, no answer, went over to Teddy's place, found him, and called 911. He didn't at that point realize that it was suicide. It wasn't until the first responders arrived and found presence of a gun, and that's what I learned that night. And so the reason that my childhood friend was liking all those photos is because her mom was at my mom's house when my dad called and said, something happened. Something happened. I don't know what happened.
Let me do a detour question just
Yeah.
for a second. Did that piss you off a little bit that she did that? Because I'm sorry, that would have riled me up as the big sis over here. I would have been like, wait a second, because that's a little premature.
Yeah. And it pissed me off thinking, like, why did she know before I knew?
Spoken like a true sis right there.
And
Yes.
then, like,
Yeah.
even my brother's best friend the next day had started to post something on Facebook because he had plans with my brother. And when he got there were all sorts of emergency vehicles outside. And he asked, and I said, John, like, please take it off of Facebook. We need to we haven't even told our family. And he understood, but I think in the moment he was just so heartbroken and he was expressing that. But like, especially in a Sicilian family, if you find out about your relative's death on Facebook from some third party, like, not a good look.
But you had empathy for him because he
I
wasn't
did.
coming from the same kind of place. And so I think you handled that beautifully. But with her, with the liking and all of that, it's going to of course it's going to jolt you. You're like, hang on a second, what's going on here? So yeah, I think again, I think I just had to ask about that
Yeah,
because
no,
we're already
absolutely.
connecting as big sisters, and I'm like, hang on a second, that would make me so upset if I didn't. Yeah, I
The
get it.
thing that upset me even more than that, and I try to have empathy for my family. My family is very close. We always have been. But when I got to my parents' condo, I didn't even have the chance to give them a hug before family arrived. And so I have always, and I wrote about this, I've always felt robbed of a moment that could have been healing for my parents, even if our extended family was there with only the purest of intentions. I still feel robbed. And that's something that I've always been angry about. And only recently, in writing about it, have I been able to really process what that meant and really understand where they were coming from. But as far as the friend liking the photos before I even got home and learned, like I will hold that till like the day I die.
Yeah. I connected with you immediately on that because I was like, hold on a second, I would totally be there. But I think it's, thank you for sharing that about your family though, because I get that. And something we talked about pretty early on in our show, there's a great guest that shared with me like more of the positive, because a lot of families get really torn apart from losing, which it's a child, which is our sibling. But she shared with me this concept of a grief bubble. And when the immediate family is able to bond and connect right away when the loss is happening, you're able to live and coexist in this grief bubble. And I feel like that's what you were robbed of, was that immediate grief bubble where it's like, okay, we're together, and okay, now we can handle the secondary family and the more. And with you being Sicilian, of course, it's going to be the big fam. It's like that whole vibe. So I think I feel this very personally for you. I understand why you feel that way. You didn't get to insert yourself into that grief bubble before you guys were exposed to everyone else, that it is in your life, but still. So I get that. I totally
And
get what you're
then in
saying.
the time after the services, we went back to we don't talk about anything. And it was,
Right.
Jennifer, you need to be strong for your parents. And I didn't know how else to be. And so I really think that moment, it impacted my ability to process and impacted the amount of time it took me to even come out of initial shock.
You feel like your shock was prolonged because of that, just even having that moment of what I like to call the grief bubble, kind of love circle. You felt prolonged. How long do you think you stayed, maybe even in shock and denial, right? In that phase? How long do you think you were there?
Almost 3 years.
Yeah, I get it.
It was until the pandemic.
So, what happened during the pandemic? That we all know what happened during the pandemic. Okay, that's a silly question.
Well,
Okay, what
well, what
happened for
happened was,
you? Right, right. That's like a 12-hour podcast, right? But what happened for you during the pandemic? Because I think it's interesting. We're almost at the same grief timeline, which is, I love doing interviews, which sounds funny to people, but where we're on a similar timeline. Because for me, I connect with you on that, Jen. Even though we lost our brothers in different ways, it's sudden, it's traumatic, and it's also guns lost, so that's there as well. But it's I 3 years was a big one for me too. It was like 4 years I started to, as you guys know my story. But with the pandemic, it was horrific for all of us, of course, but you're really forced to sit with your thoughts and process. So how did that impact your grief journey? Is that similar for you, or was there a moment, like, talk us through that,
well,
because it sounds like that was a significant moment for you.
so one thing to know about Teddy is Teddy was prepared for everything. And if there was somebody who was meant to survive the COVID-19 pandemic with like grace and humor, it was Teddy. And I remember when we first start, like years before, Teddy had said, in case there's ever an emergency, here's what you need to have in your basement. And I had some of it in my basement, which my kids always laughed at. They called it my apocalypse shelf. And then here we are, here's an apocalypse. But the part that wasn't funny is that in the time between Teddy's death and the pandemic is I did what I knew how, what I had learned my whole life, and that was to forget about it, to stuff down the feelings, to not talk about it, be strong for my kids, be strong for my family. And in that time, I lost myself. I gained almost 100 pounds. I had stopped sleeping. I was sleeping maybe about an hour ish a night. And my coping skills were horrible. All the bad things, shopping, eating, drinking, but they were also in self harm. They were all things that required secrecy. And so now with the pandemic, everybody's home. I live in a Cape Cod style house. It's not huge. We were on top of each other every minute of every day. And I was a, I was about to explode.
It, and you were going through all these struggles, but like we're in a fish tank now in our
Right.
homes. And so
And
you felt
I'm not
exposed.
going to do any of these horrible behaviors, these terrible coping skills that I don't want my kids to develop, but I'm not going to do them in front of them. So what can I do? The only thing I could do was run away. I only had one dog at the time. I took Penelope and I was like, we're going for a walk. And I remember my family looking at me like, a walk? Like, you're going to leave the house and like take a step? Like, my son in high school was a fantastic runner. And I would joke, like, you couldn't pay me enough to run. If you ever see me run, assume there's something chasing me. And so the distance from my driveway to the end of my street is about 700 feet. And I was so unhealthy mentally, physically, spiritually. I had to take breaks. I couldn't make the 700 feet. And during that walk, I talked to my brother, and none of it was nice, mostly swears. Like, how could you leave me to do this by myself? I cannot do life without you. But what I found when I got home is I felt a little calmer. And so every day, and my only goal was to go one telephone pole further. And until I made it around the block, which I had lived there for 17 years and had never left my street. And over that time, I started to feel better physically. I was losing some of the weight. I was sleeping a little bit more, but also my conversations with Teddy became kinder. And I remember one of the first times I made it around the block and I was listening to music and a song came on from David Bowie, Rebel Rebel. And I just stopped and I just started to cry. But in a good way, I was happy because when we were little and our bedroom doors faced one another. And so when we were punished, it was you were sent to your room, no toys, nothing. And we would sit in our doorways and whoever was in trouble, we would tease one another and sing the chorus of that to one another as like a way to get under each other's skin. And I thought, yeah, Ted, like, yeah, you got me. Yep. Thanks. And that's how I started to heal. But 3 years later, and I've shared so many times that 3 years from 2017 to 2020, I have very few memories. I see photos and I don't remember being there. Or
Yes.
there are things that happened and I remember bits and pieces. I have very few memories from those 3 years. And I feel like in so many ways, I wasn't living, I was just there.
So when before we hit record, like we were talking a little bit about this, Jen and I were just chit chatting as I do with my amazing guests. And I connect with that too, because it was like 2017 and 2018, especially those 2 years for me, Jen, I so connect with that. I look back and I actually had a friend share some pictures of me at my brother's celebration of life because you're not sitting there taking pictures like, yay, your person's dead. They came and they had pictures and they shared them with me recently. I don't remember. I don't know that girl. I don't even look like the same person. Obviously, we age, guys. That's not what we're talking about. But it's like nobody was home, no, like vacant, right? And so I connect with that. And I think what's really inspiring about what you're sharing too, Jen, is we have this big pressure on timeline. Everybody's like, okay, oh my God, I'm approaching a year. Why am I not over it? Or I'm approaching, oh my God, I'm in the second year and this feels like hell. It's hard. These losses are extremely difficult, especially a loss like Teddy's to suicide, where there are so many unanswered questions and you have a lot of anger and pain, and the reality is we're never going to get all the answers. We're never going to get the closure that we're constantly seeking because society puts this pressure on us. Get closure, move on, live your life. You can still live your life even though you're not going to get, like, I don't really believe in this concept of closure and you're going to get all the answers. And so I just love what you shared, Jen. You were like, that's it, I'm getting out of the house, because you were coping in ways that were not positive, and I did the same thing. I'm like, yep, did that. I'm so connecting with your story. But this actually went even further for you because, Jen, you run now.
I do.
So just walking the 700 feet and then to the next telephone pole and then around the block, and then this evolved for you.
It
So, and
did.
then you've gotten involved in so many communities. So, is that how it all started? And so, take us through how, and now you run. Like, this is amazing.
Which I always say that me running is like my brother did pranks all the time. Like this is one of his biggest practical jokes ever. I have become a runner because of him. Like in high school, we were both on the cross country team. It was a horrible team. We were like the bad news bears. And it was a small Catholic high school outside of Boston. And our coach was a nun, Sister Nancy. And she would run behind us because sometimes kids would get rides or go into the cemetery to smoke cigarettes. Like we were that kind of team. So the fact
Mhm.
that I'm running it all is like, I wonder sometimes what Sister Nancy would be thinking, and I know that Teddy is laughing. But during the pandemic, I had been involved in a Samaritans walk in Boston. Samaritans is a suicide prevention organization before the pandemic. And I wanted to do their virtual 5K, which I remember that first 5K that I walked with my family. I, my feet were blistered for weeks afterwards. But I thought, like, how can I make this meaningful? Because, like, we're all separate. Nobody's together. And I thought, you know what? In Teddy's lifetime, he would have walked 1,000 miles if it meant helping one person, even if he didn't know them. So maybe I'll dedicate the first 5K of each day to somebody lost by suicide. Because at that point, I was walking sometimes 10 miles a day. And I put out in a Facebook group, a suicide loss group, that I wanted to do this. And within minutes, my inbox was filled. And I realized I could walk every day for the rest of my life and only touch a handful of people. And it was important for
Wow.
me to share not how each individual died, but how they lived, the things that made them special. Because my brother's life isn't defined by his death, it's defined by every little moment of kindness and humor that he brought. So with each walk, I shared a photo, and I asked the families, like, what do you miss most? And when the month was over, I thought, well, Suicide Prevention Month is over, but people still need support. And maybe this is helping somebody. Maybe because I always shared the crisis line or resources. And so I thought, these miles have been really healing. And let's continue this. And so I called it Healing Miles. And for a while, I did it every single day. And that gets heavy because to carry each of these families with me and you don't forget them. Like, even if I'm scrolling on social media and I see a face and I recognize, oh, that's Patrick. His mom, Cindy, misses his smile and his laugh, and he loved his dogs. And so I started doing more dedicating, like I would do a race and dedicate each mile. Or during Mental Health Month in May and Suicide Prevention Month in September, every day is dedicated. But that gave me space so I didn't get kind of compassion burnout, but also still lets me do something I feel like I'm in service to the greater community in a way that honors how my brother lived during his lifetime.
I love this, Jen. Yeah, thank you for sharing
Thank you.
that. And I relate to that too, because you just connect so deeply with the loved ones and the families and what they've been through, because you've been through it. And so there's just an empathy that opens in your heart when you're called to do something like this. And I can't, you were like doing one every day. That's a lot. That's a lot. So I love that you were like, okay, like, how do I do this and
And that's my
focus?
personality. It's always all in. If I'm going to do something, I'm just going to do it, which is why, like, one of my first races, like, oh, I'm going to run for the first time since 1990. Oh, I'm going to do the Boston Marathon.
Oh my God.
I applied to
You're
run
so you're an
Boston.
intense person. Yes. Okay. You're
And
intense.
I remember, like, my parents saying, "We don't think this is a good idea. Like, yes, you're walking, but you haven't run since like Vanilla Ice was popular." And my big kids were like, "Mom, I don't know, you might get hurt." Like, everyone was like, "This is a terrible idea." And then there was my youngest who was like, "You're going to win and you're going to give everybody the middle fingers." And I said, "Well, I'm probably not going to win, but I promise you I will give everyone the middle finger when I finish." Which is why, if you follow me on social media, a lot of my running photos include a middle finger,
I
because
love it.
everyone was like, this is the most terrible idea I've ever heard, except for him and my best friend, who I've known since we met freshman year in high school. And so she knew my brother very well, and she knows my personality, and was like, "Yeah, you got this. Like, go ahead, do it."
You did.
And I did.
And you've been doing it. So obviously, yes, with those two monumental months, right? Like May and September, those are big ones in mental health and suicide for sure. Do you run every day, Jen? Like, what does your life look like now for this? And
So, yeah.
there are like big runs that happen during that time period. Like, what does life now look like for
Yeah.
you?
Right now, I'm getting in between. I got some freak virus in October. I was training for an ultra marathon, and I was running a marathon I had run before, but I didn't feel great. And I stopped at a water stop, and several months in and out of a hospital till they figured I had some virus. I wasn't able to breathe. I wasn't able to run. So I promised my doctor that I would not schedule a race for every month this year, but I had one in March in Virginia Beach. It's a half marathon. I've done it with my girlfriends before, and I really wanted to do it. And it had a long time limit. So I said, if I have to walk most of it, I can. So right now I am rebuilding from being sick, but during my like normal time, I run probably 3, 4 times a week, lift weights, I walk. I was not an active person in my adult life before I lost my brother. I loved having television marathons, and I one time was going to buy one of those stickers that said 0.0, I don't run. Like, it's just who I was. And now I don't want to be stuck in the house. I love to be out doing things. So right now I don't have any races planned, which is a little scary, but I know that I'll be back running a race at some point, at least in July. So
I have full confidence in you. I am completely inspired by you because I was a runner for many years and then I had a really horrible car accident. So I'm trying to build back up to running. So this is the perfect inspirational episode for me right now because after losing my brother, running was such a cathartic outlet for me. And I had a car accident 2 years after his death. I couldn't anymore. And so that's my goal. And I feel like you were meant to be here to inspire me today that I can get there again. But Jen, I think that's amazing. And I think it's really amazing the organizations that you've been involved with. And we're going to talk about where people can find you. And thank you for sharing Teddy's story, just in your story, obviously, so openly. Suicide is such a difficult topic to talk about. And also just what you mentioned about like the time where you grew up, and like even me growing up in the 90s, like there was a lot of shame around this loss, right? A lot of shame around suicide, addiction, just all these different types of losses that we highlight on this show. And I think it's so important that we're just raw and open and share about it, because there is no shame. This is a very real thing and it happens every single day. The more we talk about it and the more we bring light to it, that's how we're going to help people like Teddy, right? And all of your siblings out
No,
there. Um,
absolutely. And when I first started sharing on social media, I do think that my family, immediate and extended, were uncomfortable with that. And that first Boston Marathon, where I was every day, I was very open. I'm a writer. That's what I've always done. And so I shared on social media how I'm feeling, how I'm managing through the grief journey, how others have helped me, or things like I'm very open with kind of everything that's going on. And after that first Boston Marathon, I remember my dad said, "Thank you." And I think that my healing journey has helped them in some ways, because even if they are not really open about it, I think that this has given them space to be open in their hearts with it. And my only goal is, if sharing Teddy's story helps just one person reach out when they're in crisis, then it's worth sharing every day.
yeah. And I connect with that too, because I'm definitely obviously, I'm the vocal one in my family, and it makes a lot of my family really uncomfortable. But as years have gone on, different family members have stepped up and said, you know what, it's not for me, but thank you for doing this. And like, I get what you're doing. And like, Andreas, my brother, would be really proud. And that's been amazing. And it's really uncomfortable in the beginning because, but this is the way we express our grief, Jen.
It
And
is.
while we have to respect them, they need to respect us too. And I think it's really wonderful that you've come to a place in your family, because I do feel like there has to be a voice in the family. And I guess we're just the voices. I guess that's where we are.
They're pretty vocal.
Yeah, we're pretty vocal. We're the eldest gals. Of course, we're going to be the vocal ones. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Jen, let me ask you this, and then we'll talk about where people can find you. So, you have a website, you have so many things that people can follow you on. What would be one piece of advice, maybe that we haven't talked about yet, that you would give someone listening? Because we have so many listeners that have lost a sibling by suicide, and or there's moms, there's dads, there's friends that listen to our show so that they can help those siblings that have lost, because sometimes we're not ready to listen to something like this. What's some advice that you would give that we haven't talked about yet?
I think as a sibling, regardless of the type of loss, I wish that someone had told me, you don't have to be strong for your parents because you're grieving too. And I want people to know, you don't have to hold your family together. You don't have to be the strong one. Feel, allow yourself the space and the time to feel everything. And you're going to feel absolutely everything. And sometimes you'll feel every emotion all at once. And not only is that okay, but it's normal.
I agree with you completely. Yeah, I think we take on so much. And you have shared this throughout your story too, about shoving things down and not expressing. And it's something I hear about all the time. And I think, especially with this loss, with
Mhm.
suicide, there's so much around this. So I think that's beautiful advice, Jen. Jen, where can folks connect with you? Tell us your website, your social handles. I know, again, you're a writer, you're very active. I know you're going to work on a book, so maybe we'll have you come back when that happens. But so much going on. So tell us where we can find you.
So my website is just jenniferhoy.com. I do not like the name Jennifer, and only my grandmother ever called me that. So I don't know why I didn't just do Jen Hoy, but so it's jenniferhoy.com. And on Instagram, it's jen.and.pen, which people think is because I'm a writer, but it's because of my dog Penelope, which my kids call my favorite child. And then, yes, so the publishing a book, and the goal is for it to be published for my brother's 50th birthday, a love letter to my brother to celebrate the birthday he should be here celebrating with me. And that will be out in July.
That's amazing. And when you guys are listening to this, will be June. So it'll be right before then. So that's amazing. That's perfect.
And it
Awesome.
will
And
be
we'll be
listed
able
on
to
my
find
website.
that on your website,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect. Jen, thank you so much for sharing your story and Teddy's stories with us. It was just amazing having you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening to the Surviving Siblings podcast. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did creating it for you, then share it on your chosen social media platform. And don't forget to tag us at Surviving Siblings Podcast so that more surviving siblings can find us. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. And don't forget to follow us on all social media platforms. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Surviving Siblings Podcast. All links can be found in the show notes, so be sure to check those out too. Thank you again for the support. Until the next episode, keep on surviving, my surviving siblings.